Welcome to the podcast of Clearview Church. We believe seeing Jesus changes everything and everyone. We hope you enjoy this week's message.
You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the deep, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light becomes night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, Lord, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them as my enemies. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brianne, and I'm not John, obviously. And I'm a member here at Clearview, and John asked me to speak in this series because it turns out that the Psalms are poetry, and I am an English teacher. So that's what I do, is read a poem, explain to unwilling 14-year-olds all the things that they're supposed to be really impressed by in that poem. So I guess if you really hated high school English, I'm a little bit sorry. Not very much, though. The good news for you is that John said I can't give a quiz at the end of the gathering. The good news for me is there's no bell to tell me when I have to stop talking. So I'm gonna pray, and then we'll get started. If you'll bow your head with me. God, we thank you that we are known and we are loved and we've been created by you. I ask you to meet us here this morning, to, as the psalm says, search our hearts and to draw us closer to you. In your son's name we pray. Amen. So before I start, we want to thank Bob for reading that psalm for us. That was so good. Sorry, in my classroom we do snaps, but y'all can clap too. It was really great. So when John asked me to speak in this series, he said I could pick whatever psalm I wanted to do. And I chose Psalm 139 immediately. That's the first one that came to mind. Not because I really love it so much, though. Actually, it's kind of the opposite. I find parts of this psalm to be really challenging. And I was like, let's explore that. That'll be great. Specifically, verse 14. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I can't relate to this. I've always imagined the psalmist, as he's saying this, he's sort of like walking down the halls of a high school. He's got his Letterman jacket swung over one shoulder, his backpack on the other. Everyone's turning to look at him and his teeth are gleaming. And some girl is like, hey, how are you doing? And he's like, fearfully and wonderfully made, it gives me big finger guns energy. I don't know why. And I don't think it's just me. There's an Old Testament scholar, William Brown, who wrote in his commentary on this psalm that, this is a quote, some modern readers, this is not the quote though, I'm getting there. Some modern readers may find the psalmist's self-praise excessively effusive. Right? I think excessively effusive is Old Testament scholar for big finger guns energy. Okay. If some of you are here today and you're like, I love this verse. That's my favorite verse in the whole Bible. I love that journey for you. I truly do. I'm so happy. But again, it's not mine for a couple of different reasons that I'm now going to unload on you all. I was diagnosed in middle school with clinical depression and generalized anxiety, what I think of as unhelpful brain chemistry at best. Not saying that like the emotional elevator doesn't go all the way to the top, but it gets stuck on some floors sometimes. It requires some maintenance. Goes down a lot faster than it goes up. That kind of thing. So I was dealing with that. Then a lot of us in this room, I think, can relate. I was raised sort of in the height of the early 2000s and diet culture, where every grocery store tabloid was trying to convince me that like Britney Spears and Jessica Simpson were fat. And I remember vividly a day where a girl from my middle school came in and announced she was on a diet. It's important to note this girl had a literal modeling contract, but she had bent over that morning and noticed she could pinch an inch of fat on her stomach. And girls, CSM, that's called skin. Everybody has it. Okay, it's not fat. But like our bodies, my mind wasn't working right. My body didn't feel right. And then even in church, one of the first verses that I remember memorizing in our children's program was Romans 3:23. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Nothing against Romans 3:23. Okay, I'm on record as on board with that. But it was maybe a little bit much for a 6-year-old. I don't know, because I felt like I also was not good enough. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a really good childhood. Okay, everybody, it was great. The calls were coming from inside the house. Okay, they were here and they were saying, you're not really good enough. You're not doing the thing. Okay, so all of that has added up to feeling a lot less than fearfully and wonderfully made sometimes. I don't have big finger guns energy. I find it a lot easier to identify earlier in the Psalms. We get Psalm 8:4, where the poet says, what is man that you are mindful of me? Who cares about me? In Psalm 22:6, the poet describes themselves as a worm. And Job calls himself a maggot. Okay, this self-deprecation, form of humility is a little bit more my speed, generally speaking. Okay, we are not worthy. But just because I don't identify with this psalm doesn't mean that we can throw it away. Okay, we need to go through, and that's why I chose it for this. So the same scholar that I quoted before, William Brown, he writes that if you take it as a whole, Psalm 139 is the impassioned cry of praise from an individual whose worth as a child of God is wondrously affirmed as well as vehemently attacked. Okay, so there's some tension there. It's not all sunshine and finger guns. There's tension. There's affirming and attacking in the psalm. He goes on to say, another quote from his commentary, is that the psalm begins and ends with the self not in situ, meaning in its natural or original place, but as the object of God's comprehension, as self-knowledge derived from God's presence and power. So I was looking at this all wrong. The psalm's not about how I view myself. The psalm is about how God views me. Like, it starts with the reality that we are known by God. Right there in verse 1, he says, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me." So what does it mean to be known? This is the next question. We want to be known. We long for this. We want our spouses to know our Starbucks order. We want our bosses to remember like our birthdays and stuff. I want my students to know that if they come into class and I am still at my desk furiously typing, that they need to sit down and shut up because we're all in for a rough ride, right? We need to just know each other in this way. But there's a little bit of tension in being known as well, right? The example that I think of with this, which go with me here, did everybody else grow up like romanticizing being a regular at a restaurant? Okay, like we went to, on Saved by the Bell, they would go to the Max, and on 90210, they would go to the Peach Pit. Seinfeld, they would go to Tom's Restaurant, and they would sit in the same place, and they would know the staff, and it was, this great thing. There's even the theme song, right, to one of these shows. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name, right? Like, this is a thing. Y'all, I've done this. I don't know if it's all it's cracked up to be. Okay. So there's a Taco Bell on my way to work. Okay. I don't know if you guys have ever had a sausage breakfast crunch wrap. Okay. It's sausage. It's got a hash brown in it. It's got cheese and this sauce, and it's all wrapped in a flour tortilla. As the kids would say, it's bussin', right? For real bussin'. So for a time in my life, not every single morning, but maybe 2-3 times a week, I would start my day with a crisp Diet Pepsi, sausage breakfast crunch wrap, until one day, the lady in the Taco Bell drive-thru says, "See you tomorrow." I did not feel known. I felt exposed. Okay. I felt so uncomfortable. Like, that is not what Zach Morris told me it was going to be like. Okay. So there's that tension. Like, didn't I want to be known? Isn't that the whole point? No, like, that was not it. Okay. So as we look at Psalm 139, I think that tension, which I'm going to keep calling Taco Bell tension. I'm so sorry. It's there. It's there in Psalm 139 as well. The poet is going to feel that a little bit and then come to realization by the end. Okay. So if you haven't already, if you'll open your Bibles to Psalm 139, and I'm just going to go through it like I would my English class, right? Sometimes I accidentally bring my English class to church. Today I'm going to bring my church to English class. So the psalm is divided into 6 verse stanzas. There's 4 stanzas. Each one is 6 verses. And each of these emphasizes a different attribute of God and how he knows us. Okay. And the first one emphasizes God's omniscience, his all-knowing power. So if you look at this one, and we won't read the whole thing again, Bob did such a great job reading it. All the verbs here, right? Every good English student knows you got to look at the verbs first. The verbs here, we get know 3 times. Okay. You know me, you know me, you know. All the other verbs in this first stanza have to do with knowing. We have search, perceive, discern, are familiar, okay? And you would know, if you're a student in my English class, that every verb has to have a subject, okay? And the subject of all these verbs is you. He's talking about God. God's nature, what he does in this stanza, is he knows. He searches and he perceives and he knows, okay? To illustrate the breadth of that knowledge, the poet uses a rhetorical technique here called merism, right? There's your vocabulary word for the day. Merism is when we use contrasting words to indicate totality. So in verse 2, when he says, you know when I sit and when I rise, he's using that to encompass the whole day, right? From when I first get up in the morning, from when I go to bed at night, it's the whole thing. Same thing in verse 3, my going out and my lying down. Okay, it's the whole thing. Then in the next verse, in verse 4, he goes on to say, okay, not just actions, also thoughts. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. Okay, so God is all-knowing. He's got everything. The next verse, verse 5, is where I feel like a little bit of tension starts to come into play here. He says, you hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. So the verb here, to hem, it can mean to like bind something up, to tie it up, to keep it safe. But it also can mean, and this is a way we've heard this used, it can be surrounded in battle. Okay, we've heard you're hemmed in from all sides. Okay, so at the same time he feels safe kept by God, he feels surrounded in a way that's maybe a little bit uncomfy. Similarly, when the Bible talks about the hand of God, you lay your hand upon me, the hand of the Lord is used in the Bible both to indicate the fullness of God's presence, which, yes, we want, but also judgment. Okay, so there's that sort of two-sided thing here. God's omniscience, what the poet is realizing here is that God knows us fully, right? He's realizing in real time, all the things, everything, right? He goes on to say, such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. He realizes God knows him better than he knows himself. Okay? If the idea of being that known is making you feel a little bit uncomfortable, maybe like you'd like to run away, you're not alone. Because in stanza 2, that's exactly what the poet starts to think about. Okay, stanza 2 is going to emphasize God's omnipresence, and it starts with, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Okay, the verbs here, go and flee. Flee is not a verb that you use when you're like going somewhere you feel great about and you're super excited, like you're fleeing, you're running away from something. And the subject is I. The poet is thinking about, could I get away? Do I want to get away? Like, he's got some uncertainty there. We do see some more merism in verses 8 through 9. He says that if I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. So we've got the vertical, the whole way up to the top and all the way down kind of idea. In verse 9, he says, if I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. The wings of the dawn would have been used at this time to indicate the east. I don't know which way east is, but we'll pretend it's this way. And then the far side of the sea is the west. Okay, so he's covered all of the bases here. Okay, heights of the heavens, depths of the sea, the east, the west. There's nowhere he can go. Okay. And then he brings back that idea of the hand of God. The same idea from verse 5 shows up again in verse 10. Okay, your hand will guide me, that hand of God. Fullness of presence, yay. Judgment, yikes. Okay. He even seems like in verses 11 and 12, it seems like he's going to go into another merism here where he talks about the light and the darkness. Surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me. but even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is to light as you. It's like he's realizing in real time that the only place he could think of to go, the darkness, he can't go there, because if God's coming with him, that darkness will become light. Okay, so he's really realizing it's inescapable, the presence of God. There's no location, there's no distance that he could go to get away from that presence. So he wants to be known, but I think he's feeling a little bit of that Taco Bell tension. Okay, he's yes, God is omniscient. He knows everything. He can go everywhere. Does he, in the first two stanzas though, he's not sure, does he want that? Is he how does this happen? And why do we want this, right? And so that's where stanza 3 comes in. Okay, this stanza is going to emphasize God's omnipotence, his power in all the big and the small things. It starts with the word for, okay, which as English students, you know what part of speech is the word for. It's a conjunction. Okay, nobody lost points on that one. That's fine. Okay, it's a conjunction. A conjunction junction, what's your function? Right? Hooking up words and phrases and clauses and big ideas in Psalms. Okay, that was the missing verse of that song. So the first two stanzas tell us that the poet that God does know him completely. This third stanza gives us the reason. For is a conjunction that tells us a reason. Okay? And we need this. Without the third stanza, the first two give a little bit to me. It gives Santa Claus a little bit, right? He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Be good kind of thing. At worst, maybe it gives the police, not the institution, but the band, right? Every move you make, every breath you take, I'll be watching you. But then in this third stanza, where he explains how God knows him, that's where the tension starts to resolve. He says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." It's interesting to note in my research, I found that the words fearfully and wonderfully that are used here are used elsewhere in the Old Testament to talk about big works of God, creation of nations, galaxies. These things are fearful and wonderful. And so the poet is applying that big power to himself. Okay, it's sort of a zooming out and a zooming in situation. This indicates the breadth of scale. God's same creation power that made galaxies and raised nations and leveled nations is also in us, or seen in us. Okay. It's also interesting to me to note, because again, we love verbs and subjects, that the only time the verb know is used with the subject I. So the only time the poet knows anything in this whole psalm is that God's works are wonderful. Okay, there's some trust emerging. He says, this is what I know. You know everything, and this is what I know. Your works are wonderful. Okay. He says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. I love this here because the poet is really chewing on this delicate and personal nature of creation. He talks about knitting and weaving. These are not God speaking us into existence. These are delicate, labor-intensive, detailed processes that he's noticing how God took time and care when he created us. Okay, it's important to him to notice that. He ends this stanza by talking about how precious, how vast are the thoughts that you have towards me. There's so many. He realizes God has so much for him. Okay. And it goes back to that verse 6 where he says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. He doesn't he's recognizing his own lack of knowledge, but is in a trusting place now where he can say, God's got such big thoughts. He's got vast, important thoughts towards me that I may not understand. I may not see where we're going here, but because this is what allows him to carry that confidence that I can sometimes struggle with, is he is zoomed way out to this big God of creation and then way back in. He sees we're fearfully and wonderfully made, not because of anything about us, but because of God's power in creation. In the last stanza, the tension of that wanting to be known versus exposed, wanting to be, known or not, sort of resolves when we get to verse 23. He says, 23 and 24 actually. He says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." This is a bookend with verse 1. He started this whole thing saying, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me." And then he's ending saying, "Search me and know my heart." Okay? This indicates the poet has come to this ongoing full circle process with his relationship with God. Being known by God is not just a one and done kind of situation. God knows us, and then we invite him to know us more. And it's constantly where the knowledge is in communion. And that's another William Brown quote that I really liked from this. He says, "God's probing presence is knowledge in communion, the inseparable bond between the I and thou." Okay, God sees us as a thou, as a person, a full being he's not just an uninterested observer who's just kind of paying attention. He's not the lady at Taco Bell who, is keeping track of how many Crunchwraps I've eaten that week. Okay. He's relational. He's involved. Okay. He sees us, the images we have in the Old Testament or throughout the Bible, of God as a father, as a shepherd. He's watching and keeping watch, not to catch us or to just, see what's going on. He cares and is concerned. Okay. And so this is how I can resolve some of that tension, as I know that I'm not wonderful and fearful because of anything about me, but because my Father thinks that about me. when I think about my son, Owen, this is what gives me that same feeling. I can say without a doubt, Owen is wonderfully made. Okay. Every day I have a new favorite part of his little personality. He's funny and he's really sweet. He sees beauty everywhere, except for the other day I showed him a picture of a butterfly I saw in our backyard, and he turns away from me to like an invisible camera, says, "She acts like it's the only butterfly in the world." I'm like, okay, sir, whatever. Okay. He can have big feelings also. He's not perfect. Lord help you if you accidentally blow up the parkour course he's just created in Minecraft. Kurt Youngblood. But overall, I think he's just the best. And I think about, as much as I know him and love him, which is more than I can describe, more than I can think about. Parents understand this. God knows us infinitely more than that and loves us infinitely more than that. So that does gives me at least a little bit of like finger gun confidence, I guess. So as I start to conclude, I wouldn't be a very good English teacher if we didn't make some text-to-text connections, right? We need to take what we've learned and connect it to other things in the Bible. 2 other stories in the Bible immediately come to mind for me. The first is Adam and Eve, okay? After Adam and Eve ate the fruit and they heard God flip-flopping down the path, what did they do? They hid. Yeah. Okay. They immediately wanted to hide. They felt not known, but exposed. Okay. They had the closest possible relationship that they could have with their Creator, and their shame caused them to immediately want to be less known. Okay. That's really some big Taco Bell tension. Okay. The other one that I think of is the woman at the well. okay, in the New Testament. Jesus comes to her and tells her all about herself. Okay, yes, I know you're not married, and the man you're with now is not your husband. And she could have reacted the same way. She could have really, gotten offended and, been really upset about that. But she doesn't. She runs back to town and she tells all of her people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? She was thrilled to be known. There's such a sense of relief there, I think. She gets to drop the act. She's so glad to be known by her Savior and by her Creator. So my very last William Brown quote, he says, the psalm is a celebration of God's invasion of our privacy. And I think that is what I've come to figure out. I've worked through my own tension here. So as the worship team comes back on stage, I hope that y'all feel that same sense of relief. Whether you came in this morning definitely feeling wonderful and fearfully made, or if you've got tension, I hope that you can feel the sense of relief at being known by your Creator and being known by a Creator who made you fearfully and wonderfully and fearfully. And I hope that you'll take part with me in the invitation that the psalmist offers at the end of this stanza. He says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Amen.
Thanks for listening. If this was meaningful to you, subscribe. Find out more about us at clearview.church, or, best of all, join us in person. We worship Sundays at 10 a.m. on the campus of LSU Shreveport.